the fact that Sam Altman, for instance, has said that we are soon going to see a one-person billion-dollar company just because production costs are reducing and reducing. And yeah, I mean, I it was great
I would,
having you on. Oh yeah, go ahead.
I would challenge you, or I would say that, like, you can go one step further from what Sam Altman is saying, where he's saying one person with a $1 billion company. I'm saying no person with where an AI agent decides to do a startup, right? Uh,
Hmm.
and it goes and creates a whole solution, right? Uh, so you could even see like a 0% company that is not just $1 billion revenue, but uh, you can imagine like a multi-agent uh,
Oh wow.
AI company where everything is AI driven, right? So uh, there are some crazy thoughts here, but we'll see how the world evolves. Maybe not in my lifetime, but surely in your lifetime.
Wow. A 0% company, that's gonna be crazy.
Yeah, I mean,
Hi there. My name is Tarush, and you're watching Mural Bridge Podcast, where I bridge the gap and provide information for the next generation of AI professionals and enable to do their work their best in evolving industries. I do this by connecting with older professionals and asking them key questions about how their industries have changed over time. Today's speaker is Gaurav Mishra, the founder and CEO of ProShort. Gaurav Uncle, as I call him, is one of the most successful product leaders in the space. He has had an illustrious 28-year-long career, starting from humble origins in India, graduating from the IIT prestigious colleges, and then doing his master's in SUNY Buffalo. He actually started the first 5 to 10 years of his career as a low-level developer, just writing code and learning the software, building applications in Java, C, and C++. After that, in 2006, he took the leap for the first time and started a search company. They were trying to be the Baidu of India. He was able to scale that, and that actually took him from the Bay Area to Bangalore. And as a result of that, as he continued to set up his headquarters and iterate and develop, he was actually able to sell it to Flipkart. After that, he worked at Yahoo, ShareChat, and Uber, all household names. In between, he was actually leading product for a small search startup called Relzy, where they were actually building mobile search. So he has a lot of experience in search-based applications. Finally, he made the decision to start ProShort, which is a revolutionary startup building AI enterprise applications for sales professionals to track their success within calls. And they also spend a lot of time focused on short-form content. Um, and as a result of that, you can tell that he has incredible experience in AI just based on the introduction. So I'm super excited to bring my first podcast episode to you with him, and let's just get right into it. Hello, Gaurav Uncle. So nice to see you, and welcome on to Neural Bridge Podcast. So I'm super gifted to be able to talk to you today, and happy to have you on.
thank you, Tarush. Glad to be here and happy to do this podcast with you.
Absolutely, yeah. And what you're doing currently is incredibly relative to um, many of the viewers of this podcast who are Generation Z and consume a lot of information through short form content. And we are definitely observing a lot of industry trends angling towards using short form content to revolutionize the way we work. But
Mhm,
before I get too deep into the specifics, I'd like to first start with you.
mhm.
Could you tell me a little bit more about your career and life trajectory from India to ShareChat, Yahoo, Uber, and then finally ProShort?
Yeah, so I've been in the tech industry for now almost 30 years, like maybe 28 to be very precise. So I graduated from IIT, then did my master's here in SUNY Buffalo, and I've been working for the last 20 plus years. Uh, Started my career as a developer, writing code, building software applications. Did a lot of code writing in Java, C, C++, across like many companies, startups, and large companies in the initial 5, 10 years of my career. Uh, in 2006, I started a search company. This was based out of India. We were trying to be the Baidu of India. So that took me from Bay Area to Bangalore, where we set up our headquarters. The company, we were able to scale it up and eventually was bought by Flipkart in 2015. Um, after my stint at Guruji, I worked at, as you said, like, at Yahoo, ShareChat, and Uber. In between, I was leading product for a small search startup called Relsi, where we were building mobile search. So, I've had an interesting journey across working at big tech companies, as well as doing my own entrepreneurial um stints. Yeah, and started ProShort 2 years back after I left ShareChat, and yeah, excited to be part of this entrepreneurial journey right now.
Absolutely, yeah. And taking the leap and becoming an entrepreneur after, kind of working in an established company for a very long time has definitely been a different experience. So I'm curious, how exactly has ProShort evolved through your journey? How did you kind of think about evolving ProShort, and how did you even come up with the idea in the first place?
Yeah, so the genesis of idea was goes back to my time at ShareChat, where we launched a short video app in the Indian market, responding to when TikTok was banned and seeing great success there, which sort of caught my attention to the fact that short form content is the way that most of the content is now consumed in the consumer world. Uh, like, the evidence kind of is with how astronomically the growth for TikTok has been. Even Instagram Reels has done phenomenally well. So lots of evidence there. And then when I started thinking about, like, what to do next, the core thought was, hey, there is this very interesting phenomena with, like, LLMs and summarization technologies, which can now take any long form content, be it videos, be it like a long form document, and be able to summarize it and create like a very consumable short soundbite out of it. And so, what are the different applications we can build which can use this content in an enterprise context? So it's kind of like contrasting between how the consumer behaviors are and what's going on in the enterprise. And typically, what happens in the consumer eventually happens in the enterprise. So, like, we get used to the interfaces, we get used to consuming content in a particular format. It kind of is introduced to us at scale by the consumer companies, whether it was Yahoo with its portals or Facebook with its feed, and now, like, TikTok and Reels with its short form content. So it always starts in the consumer, and then it comes into the enterprise. So that was sort of like the key insight that this format will become very consequential in the enterprise. And so that was sort of like the start of the company. Of course, in the last 2 years of working in the company, we have evolved it and refined the idea quite a bit. So what started with an emphasis on short form content, specifically video, has now transformed into really identifying the business problem for which this format of content is most applicable and can be, like, most impactful. And in that context, what we have zeroed in on is like, sales use case. So most of the there's a huge economic impact in terms of how sales professionals create and consume content and how they are enabled in their journey, right from onboarding to like, making them more productive on a regular basis as they are kind of like, bringing business to a company. And in that journey today, like, that they're uh, they're inundated with like huge volumes of content and, like, lot it the I mean, there was a time when the problem was that there wasn't enough data, and the problem has now shifted to that there's too much data. So when you have too much data, how can you make it very effective in terms of getting the right content to them in a consumable way so that, they can consume it and become ready and prepared for their next call. So that's the key problem that we are zeroing in on. And yeah, I mean, that's the journey that we are on right now. Still early days for us in terms
Hmm.
of establishing the product and the category. But we're seeing good traction and good adoption with the few customers that we have.
Hmm.
And like our success journey is to go from few successful customers to a lot of successful customers. So
Mhm.
we are on that journey.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think that it's very impressive that you guys have been able to iterate while keeping the same base idea of effectively identifying the things that we can do to be more successful in both enterprise and consumer interactions. And the way you guys have kept that theme constant from a video-based approach to a sales use case-based approach, I think is very interesting. And is that, by the way, the reason that it's called ProShort for short form content? Or what was the idea behind the name?
Yeah, so the idea was simple enough, like, short content and designed for professionals. So like, every enterprise worker is a professional. So pro comes from that and short comes from shortening it, summarizing it, and making it relevant for them. So yeah, short and sweet, pro short. That's who we are.
Absolutely. I think it's an apt name given what you guys are doing. And it's an important thing to be doing considering industry trends so far and observing how people are starting to work. If you had to, in two sentences, define the way people implement short form content solutions in the way they work, what would you say
Mhm.
that is in just two sentences? Like, what are the two main ways they implement these technologies?
So I think what I would say is that make it super personalized and contextual, right? So personalization and contextualization, right? I mean, is are the two key sort of aspects of shortening content and making it relevant for like, for anyone in an enterprise or what I would call productive environment, right? So and the whole idea is that, like, you want to see the content summarized and presented to you in a consumable way that is meeting your core need, right? So anchored on, like, what is the deal that you're working on, right? Or I mean, right now it's sales focused, but you could imagine that even from I mean, this could be even relevant for an engineer, like, if he's working on a code, like, is there a research paper on that topic that he needs to kind of read about and get more information about, right? So it's super personalized. And then the other thing is, like, the contextualization, and the contextualization has two aspects. It's like, can you give it to me, like, when I have time on my calendar, right? I mean, so, like, instead of me going and searching for it or pulling it, can it be pushed to me uh, in a very contextual way when I have the time to actually consume it, right? So,
Hmm.
with all of the signals that you have today, you can identify opportunities where the content can be pushed, where that it's uh, the probability of it being consumed is very high, right? And so that becomes a very important thing. And then figuring out different channels, right? I mean, is this person spending a lot of time on their Slack? So you push them the content on Slack, right? I mean, if they're
Hmm.
avid email reader and they consume content through email, then you send them through email. So, like, if they're on mobile, you send them through a mobile notification, right? So figuring out the channel from where that content will be triggered into being consumed, right? So the contextualization across these different aspects, as well as, like, personalization, so that it is targeting them. So yeah, I mean, I know I gave a longer answer than the two sentences you asked for, but if I were to really, really summarize, I would say personalized and contextualized, right? I mean, if you really focus on that, that's how you want to deliver, especially summarized, shortened content.
Hmm. I guess personalization is especially important these days, is because every single person has a different description of what they want to do these days. Like everyone has their own specific sub vertical that they're interested in going into. So having personalization of content, and even within the same industry, same sub vertical, having personalization of the specific content being provided to each person is so important because each person is different and each person learns differently. That's why, all of these social media apps, in my opinion, have been so successful, is because with each scroll, each like, each comment, they keep adapting. So completely agree with you there. Um, One thing I did want to actually ask you on, many people outside of the industry sometimes think that, oh, I know it's an AI, but it may not be as accurate as getting like a human consultant to give us analytics. Um, how exactly do we ensure that AI analytics is providing a incredibly effective analysis? Because sometimes when you're using artificial intelligence, it'll hallucinate, it'll provide the wrong information. So how do you keep it at like a decent level when it comes to analytics at ProShort?
Yeah, so I think, I mean, the key in the enterprise use case or enterprise scenarios is to like, I don't know if you there are now, like, different technologies available to reduce hallucination. You can never eliminate it completely, but you can reduce it very significantly, right? And like, RAG or retrieval augmentation generation, right? I mean, that's sort of like the key technology that you leverage to sort of stop hallucination, where you basically direct your LLMs and models to say, hey, look, I mean, get me an answer only from this content, right? So you are not letting it go crazy in terms of figuring out an answer without the context. And there are some other techniques in terms of, like, multi-agentic workflows where, like, two agents challenge each other in terms of the accuracy of the result, right? So uh, these are some of the methods and approaches we are using to make sure that the content is is very specific to your enterprise environment, and the answers and outcomes you get are very relevant to you, and the chances of hallucination are eliminated because of that approach. I mean, of course, there's always a trade-off when you take these approaches. You lose some of the recall that you would get from a generic LLM. And recall, I mean, in terms of explaining what recall, I mean, there's always as a uh, in the search paradigm, whenever you're searching for a solution, there's always a trade-off between precision and recall. Precision is how precise my answer is. Recall is, do I have an answer for you? And so whenever you try to be more precise, you will sacrifice some recall, right? You won't be able to answer everything, right? You'll be only able to answer things specific to that domain. But that's a good trade-off in an enterprise setting, because it's okay for us to go back and say, hey, I don't have an answer for you for this particular question because I don't have the context. But when I'm giving you the answer, I have the context and the answer will be relevant to you. Um, so yeah, so that's sort of like the thought process that has to go into building your tech stack and thinking about where you're trading off recall for precision. In an enterprise setting, precision is everything. So you build systems that are biased towards precision. So yeah, I mean, that's some of the thinking that goes into building the platform, and that's how you pick your sort of technology building blocks appropriately, if I may say so.
Absolutely. And I think building an AI and learning to avoid hallucinations is something that's so important in today's day and age, because if you don't avoid hallucinations, um, even if you're going with like an established model, like if you decide to work with Gemini, for instance, there is a very good chance that it'll spit out completely random or incorrect information if you don't train it correctly. So I think the approach on analytics where you lose recall but maintain accuracy is probably the most apt way to go for enterprise solutions. And one thing I wanted to ask, at ProShort, are you guys planning to implement something where, or have you currently implemented it, where you can make some sort of information or context and provide it to the artificial intelligence to generate a more accurate response, or no?
Yes, I mean, it's all about that, right? So one of the core data sets we work with is like, call recordings, like how we are doing right now, right? So we and our special focus is in terms of the sales call recording. So we go through that, we segment it, uh, we annotate it with a lot of very rich metadata that again we use LLMs to kind of figure out, like, in a particular segment in a sales call, you're handling an objection, or you're talking about a competitor, or you're having a pricing discussion, so on and so forth, right? So you figure out, you first segment it into consumable chunks, and then you kind of attach metadata to it. And then everything, like all the application uses this very enriched segmented data uh, for your different solutions. So absolutely, I mean that's what we do at scale. And like I would argue that like a similar approach works for even like large documents, and like anytime you have a lot of information to deal with, and in terms of building uh, uh, highly precision systems around it. It's all about how you're segmenting it, how you're summarizing it, and then how are you creating a whole experience around it, whether it is like, and then there's a question about like what is the interface, whether it is a Q&A interface, or whether you're like, once you've processed the information, are you building a workflow on top of it? It could be an interactive agentic workflow where you're having a conversation with an avatar, or like, the final delivery could be done in many ways. But the key thing is to figure out the the information and structure it in such a way that it can be consumed no matter what the interfaces are.
Okay, yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense as well as an approach. Um, One thing that I actually did want to follow up on regarding ProShort is exactly how does ProShort um, analyze sales calls? Because I know that artificial intelligence is something that requires a lot of very accurate data. So a sales call is a very I guess, linear voice-based approach. So
Mhm.
how do you guys take that audio, raw audio, I'm guessing hundreds of hours of raw audio, and convert that into actionable insights? What is the process that you guys undergo?
Um, Without sharing too much detail, because that's
Yes,
part of our core IP, so I have to be careful there. But
absolutely.
in general, what we rely very heavily on is the whole voice to text. So first, like even though it is like video slash audio data, we convert it into transcripts. And so once it's in text, then like LLMs are a very powerful technology on text. I mean, of course, now the latest models that are out there, they even work with your image and screen data and all. Like, I mean, they're getting multimodal. I mean, LLMs themselves. But just to keep your context window small, and uh, at least like if you look at the current models that are out there, I think once you convert it into text, that's where sort of a lot of actionability comes. And so like you take a sales call, you transcribe it, you segment it, and then you start kind of like enriching it with a lot of what I'd call human consumable insights. And then you build your recall systems on top of it, right? And the recall systems can be Q&A. It can be like what you'd call pre-configured workflows, uh, where you specifically asked some questions, found some insights, and then packaged it. So the delivery, once you've done the work, the data work in the background, then it becomes easier to build applications and interfaces on top of it. But yeah, roughly to give you sort of a high level view, it's all about transcribing it, segmenting it, enriching it, and then building your application ecosystem on top of it.
Got it. And one more thing, if this is proprietary information, you don't have to tell me at all, but I just wanted to ask, have you guys considered taking into account the psychology of the psychology of the person who is being sold to? Like, for instance, if somebody is like talking and they say something, but their facial expression, for instance, is like doesn't match what they're saying, do you guys take that into account, or are you planning to take that into account in future?
Not yet. I think we plan to, but one of the things we've also observed is that a lot of conversations, especially in a sort of multi-people sales environment, are if you rely on facial features, um, they are very noisy because people switch off their camera if they're not
Hmm.
speaking, right? So if you just rely on the facial expression or even like voice, because people go on mute, right? So so uh so the what you'd call the information density, if you rely on those things, is less than ideal in terms of being able to kind of use it as a reliable source. Um, it may change in future, right? I mean, you can imagine a world where, like, for certain kind of business calls, it'll be uh, you will not see the camera switching off. I think most of the one-on-one discussions, like how we are having, you and me, we won't be switching off the camera, right? So in one-on-one discussions, you can rely a lot on the facial expressions and even like, the voice tonality and all of that, right? To detect uh, positive sentiment, negative sentiment, and like, yeah, go deeper in terms of analyzing, uh, especially the call sentiment. Um, but then I think even in those situations, what we've seen is that, like in one-on-one conversations, a lot can be still very accurately inferred from just the transcripts. So yes, I mean, at some point, the facial expression and voice tonality will play an important part in almost like analyzing the outcomes of a sales call or even a business meeting. Like, but right now, I think we're seeing great results just relying on transcripts itself. So yeah, I mean, it's definitely something we've been thinking about, but we feel that there is a lot to cover by just relying on the text aspect right now.
Absolutely. And one thing that actually I have observed myself is that a lot of times people are very bullish on the image recognition side of, yeah, the image recognition side of things, and kind of saying, okay, how can we advance artificial intelligence models to move past the text plane? But as somebody who has kind of worked with artificial intelligence and specifically large language models for some time now, I think the key thing that I am starting to observe is, first of all, large language models, as you said, are kind of the best ones on the market right now. Like, in my opinion, they are the most developed and they're the ones that are kind of pushing us forward on the AI front, more so than image recognition models, just because of the complexity of the image recognition problem for an artificial intelligence. But on top of that, especially in work scenarios, like I'm not so sure about like external scenarios, but for work related scenarios, people often communicate what they mean. So there's not often a discrepancy between what the person is feeling and what they're saying. So as a result of that, the transcript is actually incredibly accurate as a source of information to assess the call. And if you assess the transcript, there's already so much subtext hidden within the way people communicate that just basing an AI off of that, if you can do that effectively, will build the best product on the market for a very long time. So I actually completely agree with your guys' approach. And the reason I asked that question was to understand if you guys are considering to move on to the image recognition side of things soon. So with that being asked, actually, I did want to follow up with one more thing, and then we can move into the portion, like the personal portion of the interview. And the question that I wanted to ask you is, do you see ProShort expanding to provide insights about non-sales perspectives? Because yes, sales calls are an incredibly important aspect of any company, but do you guys consider internal meetings? Like, for instance, if you guys were having a meeting regarding like the financial reports that came out, would ProShort also work to generate insights based on those calls, or are you guys going to stay within the sales vertical for now?
I think for the short to midterm, I think there's a lot to do on the sales calls side of things. So we really want to go deep and solve the problem there because we see a lot of business challenges in that side of the world. But like, yeah, once we've reached a point where we think, from a market perspective, we've saturated the sales market, then yeah, I mean, we could look at some other use cases which would rely on a very similar uh, thing. But yeah, I mean, for at least for the immediate future and foreseeable future, we see a lot more value in just sticking to sales as a business landscape for us.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think that you should definitely choose very specifically what areas that you want to fix and actually fix that problem. What sometimes people like observe is that a lot of companies will half fix the original problem that they have, and then they'll try to expand, and then because of that there's too much pressure across stuff that they haven't really solved. It's like that expression which is like um, a mile wide and an inch deep. So as a result of that, they don't have a hyper focus, and then they don't succeed as companies. So I think your strategy is very much a good idea, where you're choosing one specific problem and making sure that you solve it well, and then you
Mhm.
consider expanding. So I think that's a very good business strategy in general. And honestly, that actually betrays your experience as somebody who has been in this industry for a very long time and has been really thinking about the way that you want to expand and grow businesses. So I wanted to ask you, how did you make the decision to become an entrepreneur, to start your own company, to take the leap? What was that driving force behind that? What propelled you to do it?
Um, I think some of the entrepreneurial thought and energy, is something that was there right from the beginning. I mean, in terms of um, coming out of grad school itself in '96, uh, I chose to work in a startup in New Jersey versus working for larger companies at that time. And the whole idea was to kind of see uh, the opportunities where you can create the biggest impact. And at least in my early 20s, as a fresh computer science graduate, I felt the biggest impact would be to work in smaller companies and which give you the greatest opportunity to innovate. And I would say it's not just being an entrepreneur, but also being an early employees in startups where you create a lot of impact. And it may not be exactly your vision, but like all the early uh, uh, employees in any company are almost founder-like in terms of their zeal and passion. And even sometimes in terms of the outcomes they drive, both in terms of uh, technology and solutions they create, but also in terms of the wealth they generate for themselves, right? Uh, so there was something that I could clearly see. So when I graduated, of course, the biggest story in the block on the block was how Microsoft had started 10, 15 years back and was just phenomenal growth story. A few years later, of course, Google became that phenomenal growth story, and then Meta, I mean, at that time, Facebook. So, I mean, we've seen in our last 20 plus years, repeatedly, the tech landscape and now the larger industry landscapes are transformed by startups and new ideas. Um, so, I mean, I identified that, working in smaller companies or starting companies is the best way to create impact. And uh, even though I have also worked at Yahoo and Uber when they were relatively large companies, but the whole approach has always been to kind of find opportunities where you can create the largest impact. And whenever the opportunity has presented itself, where I can start something of my own, an idea or uh, that I'm passionate about, where I think there is a big opportunity to create something unique and valuable, I've gone for it. Um, so yeah, I mean, the to answer your question, there isn't really a specific instance that I can point to and say, oh yeah, that was my trigger point of uh, starting my entrepreneurial journey. But it's uh, it's almost like a journey in its own, where like as opportunities presented themselves, I thought about the impact. I thought about what would bring me the most, I wouldn't say happiness, but like the most sense of satisfaction, because entrepreneurial journey is not about being happy. If you want to be happy, don't start a company for sure, right? There are lots of other ways of being happy, because entrepreneurial journeys are gut-wrenching, lots of highs, but a lot more of lows that you have to go through. Um, but it is satisfying. I think it's like it's a little bit of a cliche, but it's about enjoying the journey, feeling that you're trying to do something important. Uh, and the important word is trying to do something important, because the result and the outcome are uh, not always in your hand, right? So sometimes you'll end up creating something that is very important, and it gets acquired or goes public, and like lots of adulation and appreciation around that. But sometimes it doesn't, right? And you uh, like yeah, when the outcomes don't go your way, it hurts, right? So you learn to deal with it, and you go and do the next thing. So yeah, I mean that's the whole spirit behind it. Not that I understood all of it on the first day. I mean, the
Mhm.
first time when I started a company, the whole goal was to be super successful and like yeah, win name, fame, and uh, recognition and wealth and all of that, right? So I mean, obviously, initially that's the driving force, but having done this for 20 plus years, I recognize that the only reason to do this is somehow or the other sign up for the journey, right? And not for the journey being a happy journey, for the journey being the struggles that it comes with it, right? So I always kind of these days my favorite quote is how Lionel Messi said after winning the World Cup that, "Oh, I suffered a lot," right?
Mhm.
So the World Cup win was a culmination of a lot of suffering and lots of final failures for him, right? And he's the greatest soccer
Mhm.
player in the world. Um, so you have to be ready for that suffering, and the result may come your way, and you may win the World Cup or you may not, but you have to kind of keep going at it, right? So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very comprehensive answer actually, because it covers then I mean like the negatives as well, because there are also negatives to starting a company, just like there are negatives to everything. And I feel like a lot of times, like for instance, um I'm doing my best to start a company, and I'm not necessarily succeeding, but I didn't
No,
have
no,
this idea.
there is another phrase that I would tell you is the builders are never wrong, right? When you're building something, you're never wrong. And the real builders in the ecosystem always recognize that, right? Because so few of us actually build things, right? And create things. Builders slash creators, no matter what they create, they're never wrong. I mean, it may not be successful, right? But it is never wrong. So there is a difference between like, how the world perceives it as a success and adulation and all of that, right? But the guys who build are are like, you need actually the world needs a lot more people building things and trying things. And when by numbers, a lot of them will fail. 90% will not succeed, right? But each one of them has tried and built something, and that has to be celebrated across the ecosystem. And I think, for a young entrepreneur like you starting a new podcast, kudos to you. I mean, this is a very bold and what I would call courageous initiative. Putting yourself out there and doing this requires a lot of energy, thought, and you're putting yourself, and you're doing it, right? So the doing it part is what you should celebrate. Yes, of course, I would want you to be very, very successful, and I'll help you in that journey, and the universe will help you in that journey. Uh, but the outcome is is the outcome that happens later, right? If you don't enjoy the journey, then you'll, pull yourself down, and don't do that.
Absolutely. And first of all, thank you so much, and I really appreciate your support. Um, One thing that I actually picked up in what you said, I thought that, actually the viewers, listeners, however you're consuming this podcast might find very interesting is that, yes, 90% of people who start something will fail. And the 10% will become, successful, and they will be able to carry what they build on to the next, I guess, phase, next generation, if that makes sense. But one thing that I feel like we don't talk about as a statistic is the number of people who try is so little. Like 99% of people don't try at all. And the 1% of people who try, out of them 90% fail. But even if you're in that 90% who fail, you're still in the top 1%. You're
Mhm.
still putting yourself out there, you're still trying. So I feel like even if you don't succeed, the best thing to do is probably just to try, and that's clearly a sentiment that you also mirror as well. What do you think about that?
No, absolutely. This is a great way of putting it. See, unf I mean, I shouldn't say unfortunately. I mean, this is different metrics of judging success, uh, relative success in the world, right? Let's just put it that way. And in a world in which, your success is measured in terms of the amount of money you make and all of that, um, the 1% that you talk about who try may not be as a cumulative group, may not be there's only 10% of them actually succeed who make the money, right? So I mean, even you would say that 1% has the most amount of wealth in the world, right? Because they are the creator class. But in that, 90% probably don't have as much and 10% have it, right? So if you just measure it in terms of the uh, wealth, self-wealth creation, if there is a phrase for that, then yeah, the 0.1% is the really successful one. And then the rest of the 0.9% are not so. And then the 99% may have people who won lotteries or had a very successful career without taking too much risk. So that distribution may be may show a different sort of success ladder. But uh, but like that one person that tried to create, I mean, they went out there and took risks and put themselves uh, through some real hardships, right? And so, like in terms of the contribution to uh, the ecosystem, uh, they should be really, really valued, right? No matter what the outcome is. And I think,
Hmm.
uh, in certain areas of the world, where people recognize this entrepreneurial journey, those people are celebrated. I mean, I would say in Silicon Valley, the outcomes are important, but people recognize that, if you let's say, you're trying a startup and it doesn't work, it's not the end of the road for you, right? I mean, you're given another opportunity. The ecosystem is super supportive. You can, a lot of entrepreneurs, after their exit, whether it's successful or not, go and work in companies like the big tech companies, right? And then they have a very successful career there for a while, and they may choose to go back to entrepreneurship or may not, right? But the ecosystem supports them, recognizes them, and actually celebrates them, right? And a lot of uh, I mean, I know so many entrepreneurs that have had not as successful an entrepreneurial career, but have then gone into like the big tech and have had very amazingly successful career in terms of uh, roles and responsibilities and the projects that they have driven in these companies and the impact that they have created, right? Because you also have to recognize that there is a lot of entrepreneurial energy needed, even in companies like Meta, Google, where you create products which touch billions of people. So like, and those companies have been very welcoming to the entrepreneurial ecosystem, right? So it's yeah, I mean, this whole answer or this whole understanding of the ecosystem is a lot more complex than that. I think more very mature people and who know how hard it is to start things and pursue something, uh, like yeah, recognize like recognize obviously the success and the wins, but they also recognize when things don't work out, and they celebrate those attempts as well, right? Because I would say, like, when you start with an idea, it's very difficult and almost impossible to grade an idea and say if it will be successful or not, right? I mean, Google was the 35th search engine launched after many had failed, right? But amazing story of success there, right? Uh, so at the time, like when it's starting and it's getting the adulation and attention, no one knows, right? But then it's like, the hindsight is always 2020, and then people celebrate the successes that happen and uh, people associated with success, right? But for every one of those success, there were seven, eight other attempts that didn't make it for different reason. I mean, and that's okay, right? Because people who tried them explored and figured out what doesn't work. And as an ecosystem, as a society, figuring out what doesn't work is also as important as what works, right? And folks learn from it, like, case studies are written, and other folks get smarter because of that, right? So there is a lot of contribution that happens by people going out there and building new things.
Absolutely. And actually, you've already answered many of the questions that I didn't even get to ask you just because you're so thorough in your responses. And before I forget, I actually really want to thank you very
Mhm.
much for taking out the time to, sit down and film this podcast episode for me. I know it's a Friday evening. You probably want to be doing something else instead of this, but I'm very happy you took out the time. And for anybody watching who thinks that they need something in relation to analyzing their sales and really propelling their sales calls to the next generation, I would definitely encourage you guys to check out ProShort. And even if you don't think you need it, please consider it because it's actually a bigger need than most people realize. And I'll put all of ProShort's links in the description and also personal links to Gaurav Uncle. Please check him out and please spend the time to take a look at that. But I
Thank you.
actually wanted to. Oh yeah,
No, no,
absolutely.
I
Go ahead.
think thanks, Darush, for your kind words.
Absolutely, yeah, and always it's a great time to have you on the podcast, and I'd love to actually have you on again at some point.
I would
But yeah,
love to be
before
here
we
again.
close, yeah, thank you so much for actually. Yep. So before we kind of end this episode, I just want to ask three brief questions, which I call my theme questions, and
Hmm.
viewers, listeners, because this is the first podcast episode, you guys probably don't know what these are yet, but these are the three questions that I'm going to ask every guest, and it changes a little bit for each guest, but it provides a continuity over time where you can observe in each vertical what are the key things that are happening and what are the key things that each speaker would like to offer. So, first thing I'll request you to answer briefly is, what would you say to someone considering a product management career? And how do you think they should implement artificial intelligence in reaching their goals?
So I think like if you're considering a career in product management, I would say uh, like one thing I would highly encourage you to is develop like a diverse skill set, right? From being able to write a little bit of code to designing, uh, to I mean obviously like writing a PRD is part of your job description. So like having good written skills. So but I think I mean it just doesn't stop at that. So explore and have like a diverse set of uh, uh, ways of expressing yourself and figuring out like how products are built on across many dimensions, right? So that's probably one thing that you should do. I think building with AI is a very large theme. It's evolving. I think like the first thing that you should do when you're given a problem, go like play around with ChatGPT, run 10 prompt, or like Gemini or any of the other uh, uh, like LLM powered chat solutions, and just see like what is uh, how you can get the next level of insight. I mean, just starting from there itself is the first step, and being very like methodical about it, right? So that's how I would recommend. I think the bigger sort of story is very application specific. So I don't think there is one answer that fits all. I mean, it depends on what you're trying to accomplish, and like there is an AI role to play based on what you're trying to accomplish. So there's a little bit of work that you have to do to figure that one out.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think this kind of insight is something that you're not going to get anywhere else. You're only going to get this kind of an understanding of, you have to get very, very good at a lot of things. There's this book called Range. It's all about
Mhm.
how generalists thrive in a specialized world. And these kind of insights are something that you only pick up after being in the industry. So I want to thank you so much for providing me and the people who are tuning in to with this analysis that you have, because it's actually very invaluable to convince people that you can't just be an excellent coder. You have to be a good communicator. You have to understand the steps of product management. You need to get an all encompassing view of your industry before you proceed. And I think that's a very invaluable insight that you provided. So thank you so much for that.
Yeah, I mean, one of the definitions of product manager is that you're managing the people without being their manager, right? Or you're leading people without being their manager. So if you have to lead someone, they have to trust you, they have to look up to you in some aspects, right? So in every interaction, then you have to work with product managers, like has to work with designers, front-end engineers, back-end engineers, ML engineers, I mean, in a tech landscape, right? I mean, hardware engineers at time, right? So, and obviously those people have much more expertise in their domain than you do, but you have to find like but you still are leading them in some ways, right? So you have to find
Hmm.
that special angle and that special insight that you bring, and it could be market, it could be like any other aspect of understanding business, and that's why they'll trust you, and that's why they will listen to you, right? When they realize that you are adding that extra dimension.
Absolutely. And the last kind of question before we wrap up: what are three key AI industry trends that will significantly impact the short form and AI analytics industries over the decades? And obviously, no one really knows the answer to this question. It's all about what you think is the answer to this question based on your experience. Where do you think your industry is going?
So I think the biggest lever would be how rapidly the cost of tokens and like using uh, like large language models goes down. I mean, we are already seeing the cost go down, right? I mean, the cost has to keep going down.
Mhm.
That's a very important trend, right? Because that will make it very easy for application builders to incorporate a lot of uh, like LLMs capabilities into their workflows. So I think that's like the first thing that needs to happen. I mean, it's already happening, but it needs to continue happening for like a lot of innovations to happen. I would say like the second challenge would always be about like people, like, uh, uh, graduating enough computer science folks from from our universities who can go in and keep building, right? So, um, and again, I would say like it's not just like folks with CS degrees. It could be with engineering degrees. There's probably going to be a new set of skills needed where people like if you imagine a world where you know AI models produce code, who runs the code and who manages the code, right? So the educational background of the new set of innovators and creators would probably would change in the next few years. And like I hope the educational systems kind of catch up to that, right? I would say that's the second thing, how in this evolving world of AI, how the education systems keep up with it, right? And I would say like the the third system or the third aspect is always about like the capital availability, and this is where I hope the uh, like yeah, I mean in terms of the investor community and like they continue to be around and and keep investing and keep supporting entrepreneurs like yourself, right, in their journey. So uh, yeah, I would say like infrastructure slash cost of building AI models and using AI models that should keep going down. People who are wired to this new economy and this new way of doing things. And then the third is access to capital, right? So if these three things keep happening, and they'll have the biggest impact in the near future.
Absolutely. And I'm pretty confident that when we look at this in like maybe like a couple years time, you're going to be absolutely right. Like the fact that Sam Altman, for instance, has said that we are soon going to see a 1% billion-dollar company just because production costs are reducing and reducing. I think in a couple years I'm going to reach out to you and I'm going to let you know you were right, because I think these trends are something that are going to impact us over the next very long time, especially as it becomes more of a democratizing factor to build an enterprise like this. And I think that's where tech is just so great, because it is um, like a balancing factor to an extent where you can provide access to so many people, like give them the tools to build something great. So that's what I really love about tech. And yeah, I mean, I it was great
I would,
having you on. Oh yeah, go ahead.
I would challenge you, or I would say that like, you can go one step further from what Sam Altman is saying, where he's saying one person with a $1 billion company. I'm saying no person with where an AI agent decides to do a startup, right? Uh,
Hmm.
and it goes and creates a whole solution, right? Uh, so you could even see like a 0% company that is not just $1 billion revenue, but you can imagine like a multi-agent uh,
Oh wow.
AI company where everything is AI driven, right? So uh, there are some crazy thoughts here, but we'll see how the world evolves. Maybe not in my lifetime, but surely in your lifetime.
Wow. A 0% company. That's gonna be crazy.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
and if there is the thing is that if there is one 0% company that is selling any solution, there won't be one 0% company. There'll be many 0% companies. And then sort of every company is just an AI bot running and selling every single piece of software that you can think of, right? So if
Mhm.
you build on it, it leads to a very dystopic world. But
Yep.
I guess we are probably a few hundred years from that, maybe.
Yep.
All right.
This was definitely an eye-opening conversation. Like you gave me a lot of very interesting insights that I'm gonna carry forward in, what I do in the future. And viewers, I will also be writing up my own notes after I kind of rewatch the footage of this and just take down my own notes. And I'll also publish that in addition to this podcast episode. But yeah, the things that you told me and the insights that you shared with me about the importance of short form content and how to optimize models, and even your entrepreneurial journey and how to just keep going at it, be that a part of that 1% who actually do something. um a lot of these things I'm just going to take away from this call and use, and I hope, in fact, I know that the viewers are going to take this away as well. So thank you so much for your unique thoughts. And this is something that only comes from being in a high level CEO management role and being in the industry for 28 years. Um, so, yeah, we are very lucky to get this perspective from you and can't wait to see what ProShort does in the future.
Thanks a lot, Tush. Great catching up with you. Good luck with the neural bridge, and uh, hope this is the start of a great journey for you. Good luck.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Yeah, talk to you
Yep.
soon,
If you like
Tush.
this
Bye.
episode, please make sure to like and subscribe to the podcast. And yeah, thank you so much again. I know I can't thank you enough for
No, no,
coming,
no.
and it was a great discussion that we had.
Thank you so much. Have a good one.
Absolutely.
Bye.
All right. Bye.